a classified briefing with the administration on Iran not too long ago, and we also had the Secretary before the Senate on the Middle East Secretary of State. So we've had opportunities to hear from the administration. Admittedly, they were in classified settings. And let me also point out that there's been no sanctions removal since the Biden administration took office. In fact, there's been additional sanctions that have been imposed. There is an enforcement issue. There's no question about it. But I don't want to give the impression that there's been any sanction relief given to Iran during the Biden administration. With that, let me recognize Senator Murphy.
We also had two administration witnesses before the subcommittee yesterday on this exact topic. Mr. Hook, I appreciate your service to the country. I believe you are a deep patriot. But frankly, I thought your opening remarks sounded a lot more like a campaign speech for Donald Trump's reelection than a sober analysis of the situation on the ground in the region. Charitably, they were an attempt to rehabilitate President Trump's Iran policy that was a complete, total failure by every available metric. I wasn't coming to this hearing to rehash our policy towards Iran from 2017 to 2020, but I think it's really important to set the record straight, because if this committee or the American public gets the impression that what President Trump was doing was working and should be brought back as policy going into the future, we're in real trouble. Here's the facts. When Donald Trump came into office, Iran was over a year from being able to achieve a nuclear weapon. By the time President Trump left office, that breakout time had dropped to months. When President Trump came to office, proxies of Iran were strong. When he left office, they were just as strong, if not stronger. This idea that Iran stopped sending money to Hezbollah during Trump's presidency is just wrong. $700 million was the annual amount of support delivered to Iran in the middle of Trump's presidency. That's what was being delivered at the end of the presidency. There were no attacks on U.S. forces in Iraq when Donald Trump became president. From 2019 to 2020, attacks on U.S. forces in Iraq increased by 400%. It got so bad that Secretary Pompeo started to close down the embassy in Baghdad because it had become so dangerous. Attacks on U.S. forces raised to epidemic levels from the beginning of Trump's presidency to the end. The anti-Iran coalition wasn't strengthened, it was shattered. We had Russia and Iran on board with the JCPOA. By the end of the Trump presidency, Europe wasn't supporting our Iran policy, they were undermining it. President Trump's policy towards Iran was a disaster. They got closer to a nuclear weapon. Their proxies didn't get any weaker. U.S. troops came under attack in a way that they were not prior to Trump's presidency. And our coalition that had been carefully built around the nuclear agreement, but ready to be used to go after Iran's ballistic missile program or their support for proxies, had vanished. And so, Mr. Hook, let me just ask you about these metrics, and just I'll give you a chance to respond and tell me why I'm wrong. I mean, let me just give you 4 and just tell me why I'm wrong about this. Iran was closer to a nuclear weapon at the end of Trump's presidency than at the beginning. Iran's proxies were at least just as strong, if not stronger. Here's another stat. In 2016, there were 5 Houthi attacks against Saudi Arabia and UAE. By 2020, those attacks were averaging 25 a year. Third, Iran was threatening U.S. troops in the region by the end of Trump's presidency in a way that did not exist in 2016. And fourth, the anti-Iran coalition was weaker, not stronger. Am I wrong about any of those things? I don't think I am.
I would say I can go through these 4 points. On the one-year breakout, when we left the deal, Iran then did what it is allowed to do when the deal expires. And we pulled forward the expiration date of the Iran deal because Iran was getting stronger financially during the deal. They were expanding their missile proliferation during the deal. They were increasing their aggression during the deal. And I think Iran understood that under the Iran nuclear deal, they had a green light to be expansive in the region as long as they complied with modest and temporary non-proliferation benefits. And so whether we did it in our administration or another administration did it later, or we waited to expire, Iran is going to start enriching at that level. And what I would say is, what does it say about the Iran nuclear deal that it is able to achieve the purity that it did when we left the deal? We did not, I think the Obama administration went into the deal with the goal of no enrichment, but they gave that away. And the right standard is no enrichment. Anytime we're talking about how close Iran is to nuclear breakout is the problem. Because as long as they're allowed to enrich, we're going to have this discussion. UAE has a civil nuclear program. They don't enrich. That should be the standard. And unfortunately, as soon as you concede on enrichment, you're going to have other countries that are going to say, we'd like the same deal you gave the Iranians, we'd like to enrich. And so I think that's the problem. On the proxies being as strong, we never claimed that we solved the proxy problem. But there is no question, I'd refer you to the New York Times and the Washington Post. These are articles that said Hezbollah is weaker because of our sanctions. The Washington Post ran it. There were fighters in Syria saying to the Washington Post, the golden days are over. Iran doesn't have the money that it used to. Fighters were being furloughed. You had a massive... Hezbollah had to undertake a fundraising drive for the first time in its history because Iran didn't have the money that it used to. And so I think the historical record presents a different picture of much weaker proxies.
Senator Ricketts.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Iran's proxies are a threat to